Welcome. I'm really excited to be talking to Jason Smith today, who's the Global Director of CLM Product Launch for Conga. And we're going to be talking today about AI contract intelligence. Welcome, Jason. Excited to have you here.
Hey, Tara, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, the first question I have for you is what is the biggest challenge that companies have today when it comes to understanding what's actually in their contracts?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that I see customers having with respect to figuring out what's in their contracts is just the volume of data that they've got to sift through to find it. Contracts are probably the biggest source of unstructured data in a corporation. And it's also the gold mine of all of the business data, all of the information that fuels the business. So the hardest part for them is just finding the needles in the haystack.
And what are some of the, aside from finding the needles in the haystack, to get more specific, what are some of the biggest challenges that they face in the contracting space?
Yeah, so I think from a sales perspective, it's forecasting, it's understanding what's in the contracts that they've got for the business. It's looking at the obligations for legal. It's understanding what are the requirements, what's in those systems, what's in those contracts, so that they can understand what do we need to deliver, when do we need to pay, all the obligations and such. And that's why I think AI is playing a big part in this space right now because AI has the ability to scale much bigger than what humans can do in terms of evaluating all of this unstructured data, making some sense of it, and again, finding those needles in the haystack.
Are there things that AI tends to find that humans typically miss?
Well, so it's interesting. So AI is a broad umbrella term for a bunch of different technologies. I think that's one of the problems in the market is that a lot of folks are just kind of tossing around AI as some sort of magic button. And AI comes in many forms, and we have now generative AI. We have other areas like text to speech recognition, video, image recognition, things like that. So I think it really depends. When we're talking about contract management, we're talking about kind of looking at all of this unstructured data and being able to figure out like patterns within contracts. So let's say that there's a customer that I've got 10 different contracts over the last 20 years with. It would take me a while to review all of the documents and look through all the nuance to kind of figure out what's our position, what are the trends, what are the strategies. If I've got a new piece of legislation or new regulation, and I've got to look through all my contracts to figure out which ones might be impacted, how they might be impacted. I think from that perspective, it's you used to have to just throw more bodies at the project and just have more people reviewing it, which still didn't speed it up. It just took longer than you had to coordinate. AI now can sift through all that information in a matter of seconds. And I think that's really the power of being able to not just see the data, but understand the context and nature of the data and what the story is being told across a whole bunch of sets of data.
And you kind of talk about how one of the biggest misconceptions about AI is that it can be so many different things. Are there other misconceptions about AI in contract intelligence?
There's a whole lot of misconceptions, and I do think that there's a lot of vendors in the market that are intentionally creating sort of muddy waters. Because when you get to it, there's a lot of hard work that goes into leveraging AI. For instance, when we talk about legacy contracts and we talk about putting some sort of copilot or some sort of interrogation tool on top of your contract library, what a lot of people are really missing, and what I see a lot of vendors pitching is, hey, look at this cool demo. You can pop this on your system and everything's going to be great tomorrow. What they're not telling you is there's a lot of hard work that has to be done behind the scenes. You have to look through those contracts and analyze those contracts. Now, you can use AI to help analyze it, but like I talk to a lot of lawyers and I say, how many of your legacy contracts that are sitting in your database today, or sitting on your SharePoint, or sitting in your CLM today, are pristine contracts, contracts that actually represent your perfect scenario for negotiation? Because if they don't, if they're like most of us and what we're seeing right now at the end of the year, a whole bunch of contracts that we had to sign, at the end of a quarter, at the end of the year to make our number, to get that deal across the hurdle, what you end up having is AI that is now being trained on all of that messy data. And so when we look at, hey, I want a system that can give me red line suggestions, fantastic. But if it's learned from your past behavior and your past behavior is not all great, then that means your future behavior is going to be built on those learnings.
So, how do you recommend people prevent that?
Well, I think that folks need to focus on cleaning up their data, cleaning up the underlying data. And again, this is where I always say process before technology. This is the one area where technology can come before process to help. And that is leveraging the AI to examine your contract repository to help you sort through the mess, organize, figure out, where things are. The next step is putting those into a CLM. The CLM is your sort of go forward clean strategy. But a lot of companies I see say, hey, we got a new CLM. Let's just dump all of our old contracts in there and let's let the technology sort of clean it out, right? That's a lot like trying to help my wife or even, helping my mom do the laundry and just throwing everything in there, the red shirts, the white socks and everything else. It's going to all start to blend up and get messy. So you've got to do a little bit of sorting and cleaning before you actually go through that process. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson learned for most people. And the problem is so many people are jumping into AI without doing that underlying strategy and cleanup. They're kind of like, if you ever heard, once you squeeze the toothpaste out of the tube, you can't put the toothpaste back in. I think there's a lot of folks that are going to be in for a rude awakening once they realize, hey, we've slapped AI on top of our contract mess. We've made our contract mess even bigger. And now it's going to be a bigger project to unwind and untangle the AI out of that to get back to the basics.
So, it's almost like even though it might feel cumbersome to go through the process of cleaning up the data, it ultimately is worth it and they'll get their time back immensely afterwards.
Yeah, I mean it's not the fun part, right? Like when we
No.
like when salespeople go out and do meetings with customers, like it's like telling your kids, hey, if you can do your chores, then we can go out and play, or you can get on your Xbox or have fun, right? It's one of those things where it's like there just has to be some hard work that has to get done first if you want to do this right. There are no shortcuts in this, and I think there's a lot of people selling shortcuts right now.
And since we're talking about time, when they implement AI for contract intelligence, what are some of the fastest business outcomes that they experience?
Well, so it depends on what we're talking about when we talk about AI again. And,
Right?
and this is one thing I tell people all the time. I have AGCs and I have legal ops people tell me, hey, our GC has mandated AI. And I'm like, fantastic. What's your use case? If they can't articulate a use case, I tell them AI is probably not in scope for you right now. You need to understand your business process. So, in that question, what are some of the best or the fastest returns on their investment? It depends on what they're trying to do. So, for instance, if we're trying to clean up our repository, then leveraging AI to analyze and sort and organize all of that unstructured data to put it into a structured CLM or just put it into a database that you'll be able to quickly analyze, like that's a quick ROI once you go through the process because now legal teams don't have to go through that archaeological dig or that historic project of let me go look for all the things because now you've got the data and you can surface that data through reports and dashboards. You can push a lot of the information to the users. I think a lot of people are focused on the negotiation piece and how it can help because they look at the language, they look at the nature of generative AI, and they say, oh, this is something that can help us propose red lines and help us get to this quick negotiation strategy faster. Honestly, one of the things that I've seen is that when lawyers are using some of these tools, they're still skeptical about the AI. So not only are they doing the review of the contract that they would normally do, now they're reviewing the output of the AI. So they're actually adding time to the review process that they would have had if they had no tool and were just reviewing the contracts the old-fashioned way. So I think it's one of those things where once you get the data clean, once you define the process, then I think you can start seeing the return on faster negotiations, faster access to my playbook, faster analysis of the contracts. For instance, and I'll give you one example. If I get a contract in and it says the start date of this contract is 10 business days after the latest signature in the contract, takes a human a few seconds to kind of go through and analyze, okay, This is telling me I need to look at the signature block. Let me look at the signature block. Let me figure out all the dates of all the signatures. Now let me figure out 10 business days. That includes holidays. That includes weekends. Okay, now I have a date. Now I can put that date in, whether it's entering it into the CLM or just so I can write it down and know this is the start date. But an AI, like for instance our AI, will be able to examine that document as soon as I open it and say your start date is here, because it does that quick calculation, that analysis, it does that. So from a return on investment, like there's a speed to, I've cut off 10 seconds or 30 seconds of reviewing that contract. Now, if you have use cases like that throughout your contract review, and let's say you've got 5 or 10 of those instances in a single contract, and you're doing 5 contracts a day or 30 contracts a month, like it starts adding up once you start adding on the time for how many reviewers do I have, how many contracts, and the volume. That's when you start seeing the scale of the return on the AI stuff.
So if someone's looking into a vendor for AI contract intelligence, what are some things that you recommend they look for as they're looking at different vendors?
Well, I think that the easiest one everybody always says is look for accuracy in the AI. That's also sort of a misnomer, because I think that's the easy way out for a lot of vendors to go, oh, we're 99.9% accurate. Well, if I put AI on top of my contracts and I look at my past contracts, you have to understand, what are you trying to achieve? Because if I put AI on top of my past contracts and tell it, I want faster negotiations, then the AI is basically going to go through the process of trying to understand, where have the sticking points been? Where have I seen most of the negotiated terms? And it's going to try to find a shortcut. It's going to try to find a way of, oh, this is always negotiated, but we land on this spot all the time. Let's just start there. I may not want that to be my starting point, but sometimes I just agree this is where we need to end up because of other factors. So if you don't build those kind of context clues into your prompts and into your system, then you're going to get speed for speed's sake. It's not going to necessarily be quality. When you talk about accuracy, again, I may have an AI that says it finds all of the things, but we start getting into this F score and some of the technology explanation in terms of, did it find everything it was supposed to? Or did it miss some things? Or did it overfind things and it found things it didn't need to? Like there's differences in accuracies. I think the really interesting thing here is, I think the bar has been set in the consumer world with all of our gadgets and all of our tools at home, that we've set an unrealistic expectation for AI in the corporate world. And so because of that, we think, all right, well, if I'm going to go in here, I'm going to look at all of this contract data. But we also, think back to over the last 20 years, we've had an abundance of data analysis and reporting, but most of that has been structured on numbers and things like that, not on language. Now we're moving into the language, which is why the lawyers are all excited. The generative AI is all built on language, but it's really math underlying the language. So it's not necessarily built to understand the context and nuance, which is why I'm not worried that lawyers are going to get replaced. I think the administrative tasks that lawyers have been doing will get replaced, but the judgment and the know-how is still part of the art of the process. And so there's a lot to uncover in terms of AI. And frankly, I get so tired in the market of hearing the very high level conversations of, just trust us, it'll work, turn it on, here's our accuracy score, look at this cool demo that I may or may not have mocked up to work in this one instance and not in the instance that you'll actually need.
And are there things that are other aspects that you feel people overestimate or underestimate when it comes to using AI?
Well, I think they underestimate the power of AI because they don't look at the specific use cases. When they get into the use cases and say, here's the thing I'm trying to accomplish. Like I'm trying to find, for instance, a law just got passed or just got introduced, and I need to look through my entire contract repository and figure out how many of my contracts might be impacted. The fact that AI can do that in such a quick fashion that would normally be, I'll go back, gosh, probably 15 years when Dodd-Frank was first introduced. There was a provision called 165D, and it was for financial institutions, and they had to do this sort of living will. They had to report to Congress, and they had to talk about all the vendors. DORA in the UK now is a similar model, where they had to identify all of the contracts with all of these key vendors and then make sure, does it have the right language in those contracts? Well, some of those contracts go back 30 and 40 years, maybe long-term infrastructure contracts. So for me as a company, I now have to then go back and figure out, one, how many of those vendors are actually impacted. Two, once I've identified those vendors, now I have to look for all the contracts that are related to those vendors. Then three, look through all of those contracts to find the language. So you've got this series of looking through and analyzing data down to a certain level. And then it's a matter of, now I got to review that language and understand, is it impacted? Is it the right language? Does it comply? Or now am I in non-compliance once this rule gets put into effect? And so I think where it's underestimated is the power of something like that. If I can use AI, like what we're going to be rolling out with our library AI, the ability to quickly ask, hey, here's a new legislation, here's the language of it, how many of my contracts are impacted, and what language, and give me a mitigation strategy. If I can do that in less than half an hour, and frankly, sometimes it may be 5 minutes, to be able to get that answer, like that is a huge use case, huge savings. Where I think it's been overestimated is everywhere else. Basically, I think overestimation is the underestimation, or the understatement in this industry, because I see vendors all the time going, "Oh yeah, buy our AI and it's going to change your contracting strategy. You're not even going to have to negotiate your contracts anymore. The AI will negotiate it for you. We'll just have the robots talking to each other from the two-party side." Like they forget that there's an art to contract negotiation. And we're not at that point yet where AI has all of the nuance and the capabilities to understand the art of it. We have the science down pretty good, and it works at scale. So I think where AI is underestimated is at the scale of performance it can do tasks. And now with agents being able to string together dynamic tasks at a scale that we've never seen before. Where it's overestimated is promising all the crazy stuff that it'll change your life, make you taller, make you better looking, all the things that like the old cigarette ads and used to do. And use our product and you're going to be better looking and the most popular person. So
And can you talk to me a little bit about analytics? I would assume that you'd get a great level of analytics from these tools.
yeah, well, I mean, there's analytics about your data, and then there's analytics about the tools themselves too, and the telemetry. I think the analytics that you get, again, when we talk about data analytics, usually we're looking at numbers and forecasts and trends and calculations. We're talking about the math side of things, not so much the analytics of the language, which is what we've moved into in the last couple of years with generative AI. Ironically, most lawyers say, I went to law school so I don't have to do math. Now we're right back into everything is math based. All of this generative AI that you guys love, it's all math based. It's literally figuring out, what is the relationship between these words and how do I put them together to make them the most common meaning, of the answer. I think the analytics now gives us the ability to start diving into some of the context. So it's no longer just about what are my contracts expiring and what's the value of them, but now I can start layering on top of it. And what does that mean for our business? What does the look back in terms of, the contracts that we've had? Have we had some expire? Here's the other thing that's great that I love about what Conga's doing is we don't just look at contract management as the contract document. Like you have the data in the document, and this is what we're analyzing. We're analyzing the process. How many of your contracts stalled and never actually made it to signature? Most of the time, companies are kind of focused on we've signed the contracts, now let's look at all of the contracts that are executed. But there's a lot of stories in those deals that never went through. Why did they not go through? Were there decisions made? And can we feed that information into the front end of the next deal to avoid getting into those bad contracts? Once you start integrating the data into other systems, like let's say matter management, now you can start looking at root cause of I've got a contract that went into litigation or in some sort of dispute between the parties. What's the cause of that? Can I take that data now and feed it into the CLM system so the next person that's coming in to create and go through the contract lifecycle, there's some context and the system knows, and the system can say, hey, hang on, this is starting to shape up like a deal that we did that went south on us, and there's a reason we don't want to engage in this. And so there's a lot of sort of look back analytics and now a lot of proactive analytics going forward that can help us not just in the document itself and not just the numbers, but the process, the decisions, everything else.
Amazing how much more you can accomplish with
Yeah,
less time. That's great.
the
You
sky's the
mentioned,
limit at this point.
yeah, you mentioned Conga. Can you tell us a little bit more for those who might not be familiar with Conga? What are some solutions that Conga provides in regards to this?
Yeah, so I mean, at the core of all of this is CLM. CLM is CLM is CLM, and I guess the dirty little secret is there's not a whole lot of differentiation in the market in the CLM, the basic CLM steps. You request a contract, you draft a contract, or you negotiate a contract. Where we're seeing is around the edges and around the ability to capture all of that data. And really, if you make the system intuitive, then people use the system. If people use the system, then data becomes the byproduct. So if people are using, if somebody buys a CLM and they're doing everything outside the CLM and then just uploading the final document, you've lost a lot of that intelligence and a lot of that data and that insight. So what we do is we build the system so that it comes to the user. So if you're in Salesforce and you're using Salesforce, you kick off the process there. If you're a legal and you're using Word or Google, like we bring the system to you. You work in that environment and you can still access the CLM and all of the information that you need, but you can do the tasks that you need in that system as well. What that does then is that creates a process that people can adopt. Change management is always one of the hardest things in CLM. And when you have a system that people adopt and they use, the byproduct of them using it becomes all of that data. And so all of that data then becomes fuel for all of the analytics that we can do that we're laying on top of it. And again, that's just the CLM piece. We've got CPQ and all the pricing stuff and billing and e-signature. There's all sorts of things in this whole life cycle that we feed into. We don't just view contract management as a siloed document process of let's move a document from point A to point B. I think that's where a lot of folks view their CLMs.
Certainly gives an opportunity for them to have more connected processes in their business, to have a CLM, CPQ, and so forth all together.
Yeah, and I think everybody would agree that the more connected, the less siloed you have the business, the better. The more intelligence you have across that organization. And perfect example is when I used to do CLM implementations. We used to get everybody in a room. I would get legal, I would get sales, I would get finance in a room and say, let's talk about your contracting process. Who starts it? Where does it start? How does it start? What we ended up finding was as we go through that meeting and the players are talking about, well, I started here and I do this, suddenly legal will say, well, sales, why are you doing it that way? Why don't you do it this way? And then they start solutioning across the board. The reason being that if you don't know what you don't know, then you build for what you're comfortable with. And so sales will build what they know, and then they'll throw it over the fence to the black box of legal. Legal will do what they know, and then they'll throw it back over. And so nobody really has that vision across the fence to their neighbors. If you bring them all together and say, let's talk about this process so everybody can understand what everybody else is doing, now you can see the upstream and downstream impacts of what you're doing, which brings a little bit of value to their job because now they see, hey, I'm a bigger part of a larger story. But it also gives them insight into here's what they need from me. Here's what legal needs from me to make my contract go faster so I can get to my commission faster. Legal sees that, like, you just start doing that. And so the way that Conga views this is we want to interconnect all of these folks. We don't want them to all have different systems and different siloed processes. We want to create a single platform with unified data across the board. So whether you're looking at the data in Salesforce because you're a salesperson, or you're the same looking at the same data, but you're in legal, you're seeing the context based data. So you're seeing the contract value, you're seeing the contract metrics, but it's telling you the story you need to know, but in that context of the rest of the group. And so what you've then created is an intelligent organization, not a series of siloed, sort of semi-intelligent business units.
Love that. Absolutely. Now, is there anything that we didn't cover when it comes to AI and contract intelligence that you think would be helpful for someone to know?
I mean, I could talk about this for days, so I don't know how long we have on this, but there's so much noise in the market that it's hard to really understand, especially like if you're a lawyer and I talk to legal ops people all the time, they have fatigue of AI fatigue. but they also see the promise. And so they don't want to miss out on what's the next thing. What I would tell people is in your sort of non-business life, and I know companies are worried about shadow AI, where it's like you cannot put our documents into ChatGPT. And then somebody goes out and puts their documents into ChatGPT on their personal computer. Like there's things like that. Like be careful what you're doing because everything you do on the public view of these systems can have some impact in terms of training and unnecessary disclosement of information. So I'd say be very careful about that. When you're looking at CLM vendors, ask them questions like, are you training the general models on
Mhm.
my data? And that's one thing we absolutely at Conga do not do. We make sure that any training goes directly into the small language model for the customer. We don't send it out to a broad customer. And I know there's a lot of vendors that really they start getting the kind of glossy eyes of, hey, I've got all of this data from all of these companies. Boy, if I could put it all together, I'd have this like this holy grail of data, and then maybe I could sell it. It's sort of that like if you will, the social media tools that realized, hey, I've got all this data. Now I can sell it to advertisers and everything else. So I would just say, kind of be careful what you're doing with the AI. When it comes to the commercial stuff, with respect to like with Conga and customers, evaluating I think you just have to trust the people you're working with. Like the technology is technology, and understand that none of us in the CLM space are creating AI. We are all consumers. Every single one of us vendors are consuming AI from any of the big, large corporations. It's how we apply that. And that's where you have to get somebody that understands the business, the use cases, understands your business to apply the AI. If we just come to you and say, hey, AI for AI's sake, I wouldn't buy it.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, Jason, it is always a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate your insights on this.
I always enjoy talking to you too, Tara.
All right. Well, thanks. Take care.
Yep, thank you.